So you work with OpenAI as an investor. What is your view of the agreement with the Department of Defense and how things have played out?
Look, this isn't really, these two companies obviously have been battling it out on the model front, and this really isn't about the model this time. It's really about contract language, and the fight, here is mostly about one phrase actually, which is the phrase of all lawful purposes, and ultimately comes down to the values and the philosophies of both companies, and you're seeing that play out in real time.
Okay. And so do you see people are concerned that OpenAI has said that they're okay with that phrase and they're saying that they have other guardrails to sort of, protect against uses that they don't approve of. I mean, do you understand the concern from people? Walk us through how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, look, Sam did an AMA and he broke it down really well, which is, at the heart of this whole debate is one meta question, and one maybe that's more important than the red lines, which I can get into. The meta question is, does a private company, even as important as Anthropic or OpenAI, do they have more power to decide how the government operates than democratically elected officials and the government? And I think that's the heart of the matter here, because ultimately we have a government that has a Department of War that is has the responsibility and the context and the people and the expertise to interact with the technology to fulfill its purposes. And Sam has ultimately decided that it's not up to OpenAI as a company and their leadership to determine how to use that. And I think that's the right point of view. I don't think there should be a single company, private company, that can control what the government specifically does when it comes to matters of national defense.
Let me ask you about this supply chain risk designation. As an investor who's investing in the AI sector at large, and we'll step outside of the OpenAI sandbox for just a minute. I mean, does that designation or the idea that the government may grant or label a company with that designation, does that cast any kind of a chill for you over investing in AI, or does it add any kind of a risk for you as an investor?
Not on the broader spectrum of things. It is unprecedented, just to be clear, that the government is looking at applying that kind of designation to a private company. With that said, I would imagine in defense tech that if there are situations where a company decides um, not to provide the technology or the capabilities that the government needs to fulfill its responsibilities and activities, then it seems fair that the government has some repercussions and abilities and teeth to enforce the rights that they have, which is, as a government and using a specific vendor, they have the right to protect our nation's citizens. So I can understand it to a large degree, but I also understand the concerns that others may have, where if the government becomes very heavy-handed in that manner, then what rights do we have as citizens to protect ourselves?
And one more question for you on this note here. I am curious around the differences in the technical capabilities between OpenAI and Anthropic. I mean, is it your understanding that there is a difference in how much control OpenAI has over its technology compared to Anthropic? I'm sort of trying to understand the argument here that the the technology guardrails could really uphold the risk against the language, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. So maybe coming back to my first point, where this is actually a battle between contract language and not actually the models. If you look at the difference between OpenAI and Anthropic, there are small differences in the actual deployment of the technology. OpenAI largely has focused on enabling its application in the cloud. Uh, Anthropic, through Claude Code and their plugins, actually is tied deeply into existing applications that we use every day, things like Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel. And there's a slight difference in that deployment, but it's again back to the contract language. And what's happened here is Anthropic has decided that they want um, very, very bright red lines and enforceable contracts to try and control and narrow the permissions up front. And what OpenAI has decided to do is actually live under the umbrella of all lawful purposes, which is basically trusting the government to use the technology lawfully, um, and then control the use of OpenAI actually through the deployment. So there's a few things that they've done, which is it has to be deployed through the cloud and not at the edge. So OpenAI can monitor how it's being used and can actually enforce the red lines. They can actually they've got safety and guardrails that OpenAI controls, which is basically OpenAI can enforce the guardrails directly through the model itself. Third, they have their safety and alignment team deeply embedded inside the deployment of OpenAI's product inside the Department of War. So it's really this matter of, Anthropic trying to restrict and get these bright red lines, which there are two things that they really want, which is, no mass surveillance of U.S. citizens, and the second one is no autonomous use of AI in the use of weapons. So those are the things that Anthropic wanted upfront, and the Department of War committing that they don't do those two things. But if you think about war and government, it's always a nuanced thing. There are gray lines that humans need to make the judgments, and the government's basically saying, and the Department of War saying, you need to trust that we are going to do the right things for U.S. citizens and our country. And Sam has ultimately decided that he trusts the U.S. government and the Department of War to do that. I would add that OpenAI also added one more red line that is very important to them, um, and that is no high stakes automated decisions, things like social credit, where, for example, the CCP and Chinese government monitor whether you jaywalk across the street, and that takes you take a hit on your social credit, and that has implications to your ability to borrow money and perform business activities. OpenAI has also added that the U.S. government cannot do that. But I think ultimately, um, I do believe and I admire um, Dario and Anthropic for what they've done, which is take a stand for the values that they actually incorporated the company on. And if you remember, Dario and his team worked at OpenAI, and they were very critical in the launch of ChatGPT and GPT-3, and they spun out of OpenAI because they felt that at the time OpenAI wasn't prioritizing the values of safety, which they cared about, and they've built the company upon the principles of safety. And so there was a real test, and I was really, really curious to see if Dario actually stood up to the constitution that basically he built the company upon, and massive respect to him and Anthropic for doing that. But I don't think ultimately it's a moral argument, because I think OpenAI um, is going to enable the things that the government needs to do, but have the right type of restrictions in place.
Right. I want to zoom out a little bit. So, this was not the only news that OpenAI made last week. It obviously had the big funding round, and one thing that that we were all sort of studying closely was some of the conditions upon which some of the backers, namely Amazon, have underneath the $50 billion investment. There's some conditions. You either have to uh, go public, or you have to basically reach AGI. I think is sort of the understanding here. And I just want to ask you about the IPO piece of all this. I mean, what is your understanding here of the timeline for OpenAI on an IPO?
Look, I can't comment publicly on that, and I think the company and Sarah Fryer have done a good job just helping people understand the how they think about it. So I'll leave it to them. Um,
So, and
look,
and maybe the broader question I have though is, as an investor, we've reported extensively on the company's financial projections, and I'm curious how you think about how much the costs of the company is going up, and how you think about their path to profitability at all in this climate where it just seems like they continue to need more compute.
Yeah. I find it funny when, others at this point in time, I mean, these companies are not that old. And we're in the biggest technological shift, and wave and platform shift, the most important shift that has ever happened. It takes a lot of dollars and money and research to continue to increase the capabilities of the models and the product. On top of that, the inference demands through the roof. And I've said this publicly, but I believe the demand for compute intelligence is infinite. And when you're dealing with a situation where you are redefining how the world gets work done, you are providing cognitive power and intelligence to almost every aspect of our lives. I don't understand why so many people are fixated on both companies being profitable today. Um, if you look at the history of Amazon and Google and others, you will find that I kind of abide by Jeff Bezos's long letters to his investors when he was public, which is we will focus on being long term in our thinking versus being short term focused on profitability. There's so much to be built. There is so much R&D to do, and we are still figuring out the unit economics of inference. And in that environment, I think it makes sense that both companies raise a lot of money and give themselves cushion to have the capabilities and the team to build a product and deliver that to their customers. I think if we look back in 10 to 20 years, both companies will be massively profitable. uh, the most important companies that we have that are public, and they will be profitable. And we will look back and wonder why some people in year 3 or 4 of OpenAI and AI and Anthropic's history was so fixated on them being profitable. I just don't think it's important today.
Got it. Well, Ethan, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Ethan Choi, a partner at Khosla Ventures here on TITV.